Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Geopolitics is changing quickly. Just in the last few days, we've had the US pressuring Australia to increase defence spending to combat China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth is warning that a Chinese military attack on Taiwan could be imminent, his words. And in Europe, Ukraine has launched a major drone attack on Russian airfields, wiping out billions of dollars worth of bombers. But is it enough to change the course of the war? Professor James Curran teaches political and diplomatic history at the University of Sydney and is a columnist at the Australian Financial Review. His latest book is Australia's China Odyssey, From Euphoria to Fear. James, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thanks very much for having me.
Let's start with the US. How are we to take Mr. Hegseth's comments about how much we should be spending on defence? It's almost insulting from someone, from a commoner like me, right? But to actually hear the US trying to dictate what we should be spending in any area, I don't know, it takes some getting used to, James.
Look, yeah, it's certainly something I think the United States under Trump is now giving Australia and key allies and partners in the region the European treatment. They've sort of shocked and jolted a lot of the European countries into upping their defence spending as a percentage of GDP because they felt that the United States was carrying too much of the NATO burden. Well, clearly that approach is being now applied to Asia. I think the American administration must know that this is not possible for a lot of the Asian allies and partners. And, as I argued today in the Financial Review, perhaps they don't even care. I think the problem too is that the message is being delivered by someone with no real stature or authority. In Pete Hegseth. He's had a very troubled period as US Defence Secretary. And I think a lot of Asian allies will be doing with this announcement effectively what they've been doing with the tariffs. We just don't know really how much pressure the United States will keep pushing on this point. Trump, as we know, is mercurial. The tariffs are on, then they're off again, then there's a pause, then the courts are stopping them. And I think, in the case of Australia, it is, I think, healthy that the Prime Minister has already pushed back against this kind of demand from Washington. He's saying that Australia will stick to 2.33% of GDP on defence by 2032 and is resolute that Australia is already doing enough. But it's very clear that the United States thinks at the moment that what worked in Europe is going to work in Asia, but I'm not sure it'll be quite as easy as that.
How does Australia play this? Because we are very close to China in a trading sense, and it's a very important economic partner. In defence-wise, US up until now has always been our greatest ally. What is the path forward in the next little bit?
Yeah, well, it's a tricky time and it needs a lot of diplomatic guile. And I do think we are seeing some signs of guile from the Albanese government at the moment on this. They are not just caving in. Unfortunately, Defence Minister Richard Marles has sort of opened the door to a conversation with the Americans about this increase in defence spending, but perhaps he has to say that publicly. Privately, I don't think we're going to budge. The issue too here, Sean, is that Hegseth said that the allies who think that they can still have a very close relationship with Washington on security and good economic relations with China, he actually said they will be a drag on decision-making in a time of crisis or conflict. So in effect, he's trying to say that if you want to have the best of both worlds, those days are over. Now, try telling that to most of the Southeast Asian economies who, while they still want the United States to stick around militarily, are not about to cut themselves off from the China market. And Australia is not going to do that either. Trade Minister Don Farrell has said emphatically that Australia wants to do more business with China and that Australia will act in its interests, not what the Americans might want us to do. So I think, like the Japanese, I think we probably just need to play this pretty calmly, pretty cautiously. There's no need for strong language going back to Trump. We've already ruled out retaliation on the tariffs. I think that's very wise. I think we can just keep the conversation going, perhaps on the 10% tariff across the board. But I'm not sure the administration really deep down thinks this is a realistic prospect for Asian economies to get up to 5% of GDP. They want Australia to get to 3.5%. Well, that means the Albanese cabinet has got to find billions of extra dollars over the next 5 to 10 years, and to find that money, something else has got to give. We can't have everything.
Just before we leave this region, Hegseth talking about a Chinese military attack on Taiwan could be imminent. Does that fit into the ambit claim style bucket that seems to come out of the White House all the time, or is there some truth in that?
I think it's very wise to take Xi Jinping at his word. That is to say that the Chinese president is in his early 70s. He's ambitious. He has sort of well and truly sort of displayed his capacity for aggression and assertion. He has well and truly displayed a capacity for bullying other countries. Just ask the Philippines. Now, I don't think it necessarily follows that he has a sort of specific timeline in his head on Taiwan. Mind you, he has made it very clear that the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, as he puts it, is conditional on Taiwan coming back to the Chinese mainland. Now, I think the United States is probably, I think they are probably using that threat of an invasion to up the ante on the Allies. But I think Xi Jinping will probably move with a different calculus. He'll be looking at other motives and factors as to how he could possibly engineer the return of Taiwan. I don't think it's going to be by an amphibious invasion or an outright military assault. I think we're going to be looking at some kind of potential strangulation of the country financially or economically in a way that makes it very difficult for the Allies and the United States to know when to intervene. It's going to be potentially something of that kind.
Stay with me, James. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is James Curran, Professor of Modern History at the University of Sydney. Moving continents, Europe, Ukraine's strike against Russia. How significant is it?
I think it's very important for Ukrainian morale because, let's face it, after the kind of public drubbing that Zelensky got in the Oval Office, which I think has alarmed a lot of allies around the world, including Australia, that a close ally of that kind can be treated in that way in the centre of American power. And given the fact that, the United States under Trump is more or less kind of walking away from Ukraine, and the Europeans have, to their great credit, banded together and said that they will guarantee longer-term supply of munitions. So I think in terms of just bolstering Ukrainian morale, the fact that they've got the capacity to make such a strike, I think is very important. But in terms of the ongoing drama around trying to end the war, which I think is a good thing that Trump wants to do, but he's clearly losing patience with this. I'm not sure it will change that much in terms of what Putin will demand. And at the moment, Putin appears to be getting pretty much everything he wants in that respect. And he's not going to give up Crimea, and he's going to want to say that he's taking those Russian parts of the Ukraine back and reincorporating them into the Russian motherland. So the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, I mean. So will it have an effect on the long term? I don't think so. But in terms of Ukrainian morale, I think it's very, very important.
How does that play out, do you think? I mean, that's how long's a piece of string, I suppose. But what do you think will happen in Ukraine and Russia over the next couple of years? Do you think we'll find a peace there?
One can only hope that, because there's a lot of innocent people dying, as well as the battlefield fatalities. And, how long is European resolve going to hold on for? Putin has been able to throw the kitchen sink at this and some. I just don't think Putin is going to move on having that land bridge down to Crimea. And I don't think he's going to move on his opposition to having peacekeepers, European and other countries' peacekeepers in Ukraine. At the same time, I don't think, given the fact that Putin has been struggling to hold that percentage of Ukrainian territory, which is 20%, I don't think it necessarily follows that if Putin does get what he wants in Ukraine, that he then starts on a pattern of conquest of the rest of Eastern Europe, or trying to sort of reform the old Soviet Union. I don't think Russia has the capability to do that. And it has been to the Ukrainians' enduring credit that they have been able to, bog Russia down and show up the limitations of Russian military capabilities. I think we're still looking at a frozen conflict for quite some time. One can only hope it is not the same kind of frozen conflict that we had and still have after the end of the Korean War. But it's very difficult to see both sides relinquishing key negotiating positions here. And the Americans, as I say, seem pretty impatient with it under President Trump.
James, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure.
That was James Curran, Professor of Modern History at the University of Sydney and columnist at the Financial Review. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news you can use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.